This is cool. I am really pumped to have you here. I am joined by the one and only Dr. Julie Gurner, Quora answerer extraordinaire, psychologist. Oh my God, I could add so many things. Esports consultant. What else should I add? What other titles should I add for you?
I don't know. I host a podcast for Slate.
There we go.
So that's kind of a good thing.
Can you say? You should say the name of your name. What's the name of your podcast so people can find it?
It's called The Relentless. It's actually sponsored by Century 21 Real Estate. It's about success and how to be successful and using kind of like a psychological perspective. So I have my hand in a lot of different pots. So this is, Twitch is amazing. I love the people that I meet here. I love what you're doing. Dr. Mick is kind of a legend on my stream. All the people that I've talked to on my stream said he's amazing. It'll be great. We can't wait to see you. So I'm stoked to be here. It's wonderful to be here.
Well, I am really super glad that you are taking the time to hang out with me, because I have heard a lot about you. So it's like this mutual thing. Like, you've heard about me, I've heard about you. I know when we talked on Tuesday, it seems like you and I got into doing what we're doing on Twitch for the same reasons. By the way, for those of you who don't know, Dr. Gurner does have a Twitch stream. I put a shout out in the chat for her. You should go follow her, because she does psychology office hours. On what days do you do those?
I do Tuesdays and Thursdays, just for an hour, from 5 to 6 Eastern Standard Time.
Awesome. So yeah, y'all should go hit her up during those streams, because it's fabulous. The first thing, I guess, I wanted to set the stage, I guess, for people who don't know who you are. Just very briefly, can you say a little bit about your journey and all the multiple hats that you've worn, so that people know where you're coming from in terms of all these wonderful answers and thoughts you're going to have?
Absolutely. I started off, I'm a doctor of clinical psychology. I started off very early on. I started in forensic psychology with adult population. So my expertise is adult psychopathology and forensics, technically. So I deal with people who were adults who had anything from mild to severe mental illnesses, usually within the forensic or prison system. Then I went to working in a hospital where I worked both inpatient and outpatient, and then moved on to academics, and I was a professor for about 8 years. And then kind of got connected to kind of the tech community and other things happening, ended up going into consulting and doing work with that aspect of psychology, started working on a number of different projects with tech and apps and those types of things. And then really became interested in doing some work giving back. Much like Dr. Mick, I love interacting with people, and I really miss it sometimes in my job. So as a way to kind of give back, I answer questions on Quora, I do things on Twitch, and I try to be there because, for me, I think if somebody were able to ask a question of a psychology doctor for free, that really can give a lot of information, put a lot out there, especially good information. When you're getting information from Dr. Mick, you're getting it from the real source who understands, where you're coming from. You can clarify. It isn't just on WebMD and very general and non-specific. So, that's kind of why I'm there. It's a way of giving back. I love my community. I think it's so cool that people from all over the world are connected on Twitch, and we have a great community. So, I love that, and that's why I'm here today. And I think Dr. Mick does amazing work, and I'm a big fan. So I think the love is mutual.
It is indeed. Yeah, I think I just think it's so cool that, especially somebody, I like to say I have a pretty good amount of knowledge, obviously, but somebody with just the amount of expertise and just different hats you've worn. I know when we were talking on Tuesday, it's really cool to be able to give resources and information out for people with no obligation for them to pay. It's just really a way to give through a platform that I don't think ever anticipated that this is the kind of thing that would happen through it.
No, not at all. Not at all. And I think that's what's so cool about it, though, because, Twitch has become a place where you can really find anything. And I think that adding to that, when they really expanded out of just straight gaming into, we can have all different types of things on there. I have friends who watch cooking shows and people who are doing all sorts of things. But I think that this is, you know, in a way, it's one of the best uses out there because you meet people where they're at.
Yep. Absolutely. Like sitting in their living room while playing video games or wherever they are. It's really, really cool. All right, so I actually got a really good amount of questions in Discord, which I was really excited about. And so
Cool.
I wanted to start with, so you were I want to make sure everybody knows you were a therapist. You no longer hold a license, but it's not like you forgot how to be a therapist. So
Right.
those so those questions are all still cool too, but I just want to make sure everybody knows that as well.
Yeah.
What made you decide to go into like the field of psychology? Like what drew you to it? What do you like most about being in it now?
Very cool. I started off in college pre-med. I wanted to be a surgeon. And I think, you know, I'm a very dexterous person. Like I love working with my hands and I think I have a decent hand-eye coordination. So, you know, maybe in a past life, I would have been a decent gamer. But, you know, I think that, you know, going into that kind of pre-med, I love science and I loved like the study of it. But then, you know, it started to get really dry, you know, like because it wasn't material that I was personally invested in. I took one psychology class and I was like, this is it. Like, this is what I want to do. And I just began to switch over things and I began studying philosophy and psychology. And then from there, went from my like bachelor's and I applied to a doctoral program from there and then went kind of straight through. So I was done at 25, which is, you know, super good and saved myself some student
You
loans.
beat me by 2 years. That's impressive as hell.
But I just wanted to get done. I don't come from a wealthy family, and you know, like those loans are big money. So,
Oh yeah.
you know,
Oh yeah.
we do what we can.
Wow, 25. Oh my God. That's
Right.
awesome.
I felt ridiculous. You know, you're in a hospital and you're doing some serious stuff, and they're like, "Who's this kid?" You know.
Yeah. What was it so like when you were sitting there and you took a psychology class and you were like, oh my God, like this is it. Like, what is it that grabbed you so much about it that made basically you completely pivot in terms of what you wanted to do and shaped the trajectory of your career? Like what specifically grabbed you about it?
I think that I was used to studying, like I was used to being a good student and just like studying material. And I think everyone can relate to that. Like you're memorizing stuff and, you know, you're going through the motions and you're doing okay in it. You know, you're pre-med, you're doing well, but you weren't really connecting with it personally. Like you didn't find something that was like, okay, this is really the passion. This is really what I'm into. This is what I would read in my spare time.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started reading those theories and started to read like getting into how people function, it was a new way and less tangible way in some ways to kind of fix someone. When with surgery, I thought of it as like I could be this human mechanic, which is maybe kind of horrible and horror movie-ish, but you know, I thought that's kind of how I could do it. I could actually go in and fix someone and really like have them come out better. And that was the appeal. And I think in psychology, you're still a fixer, you're still somebody who's involved and wants to be involved in that, but this is from the inside. You're working almost sometimes with invisible injuries and you're dealing with things that to me I think take the same level of meticulousness, but you're just doing it through different channels. You're listening carefully, you're putting all the symptoms together, you're kind of expecting them to kind of help you and work through that. And to me, you know, going into the science of it and the biology of it, as well as the theoretical aspect, man, there was just nothing better because we're still growing. Like psychology is still such a new science compared to so many other things out there, and there's room for growth and development and new methodologies. And I think we're still kind of in the infancy stages of understanding the brain and understanding how we function. You know, we're
Mm-hmm.
learning so much about the gut and that relationship to things like
Yeah.
autism and depression and anxiety. Like there's so much out there and it's really exciting for me. Um, so I just kind of have used that and had it fuel different kind of things along the way, whether that was in forensics or then in teaching. I saw one of your listeners asked why I don't have a license anymore. And it's because, you know, when I went into academics, I knew I would just be teaching and, you know, I wouldn't really be doing counseling. And I kind of knew at that point that my trajectory would be going in a different direction. So, you know, as we evolve and as we grow, for me, it was a matter of how many people can I touch, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I first start out doing therapy, it's one-on-one. and I'm having that impact, and that was exciting. And then going to a university, I'm like, okay, I can work with people who then impact like generations, right? I mean, they
Right.
study psychology, they get a degree, their families change. And then when I went into business, I'm like, I can work with products and apps and people who reach millions of people. And so for me, it's been about scaling, and that's probably part of the appeal of Twitch too. You know, you can reach people all over the world, and so I find that that's my best use. It's not everyone's best use, but I think that it's
Awesome. So for you, it seems like what's really been important is how can you reach as many people as possible, and I think it's really important for people in psychology, like in therapy, to know that about themselves, because like I don't know about you, but like I found that I recently just changed jobs. I think I might have told you that, and like I kind of reeled back out of academia and went into private practice, and now I do like some adjunct stuff. But for me, it was like kind of how do I connect with psychology and with other people in ways that are meaningful for me. And I think it's really cool that you like really sat down and thought about the type of outreach you want to have and the impact you want to have. And so there's nothing wrong with leaving a license if it means being able to have that impact. And like I said, it's not like you forget how to do it. It's not like you forget what you learn about being a therapist. So
right.
I just think
And
that's
I
really
think that
neat.
it's so amazing that like what you're doing is being able to be a like a practitioner as well as an academic, as well as reaching out. And I think that gives you such a range of experience, because working with someone one-on-one is a very intimate thing. And I think there's something
Totally.
really addictive about it. Like it's very intense in a way that very few things in life are. And I don't know how many people would really, unless you're on the other end of it, I'm sure it's just as intense.
Sure.
Did your program require you all to go through therapy at all?
No, they heavily encouraged it, but they wouldn't like force us to go. And it's actually kind of interesting. I was one of those students who was actually resistant and actually carried the internalized stigma that many people carry about therapy, and was like, nah, like I don't really need to do it. Like I worked on a suicide hotline. I can handle it. I don't need to go to therapy. I was really resistant to it. And I think part of why I do what I do now is because I know what it felt like to have that stigma inside and to like resist it because of that, not for any fault of your own, just because of what you've heard about therapy and what you think about it. And so I'm actually a big proponent now of programs telling the students, hey, go to therapy and know what it's like to be on the other side of the couch, because I have gone to therapy since, and I have been on the other side of the couch, and my appreciation for being a therapist went up significantly after I felt what it's like to have my own resistance in the room, where it's difficult to be pushed, stuff like that. I think it gives a whole new perspective.
Did you feel like you were a particularly harsh critic of your therapist's work?
Yes. when I was in a really not good mental space, yes, I kind of took out some of that frustration on overanalyzing the therapist. I think when I finally found the right therapist for me, I stopped doing that and was able to more engage in the process and not critique it so much.
Right. Oh, I totally see that.
Yes, that was absolutely, and I think my therapist could feel it, and I think it kind of drove him nuts.
I bet. Yeah, because it's fascinating, because I think that, you know, one of the main things that I see just in general when I take questions, like whether it's Quora or here or wherever, is that sometimes like you can see therapists who drop the ball, you can see therapists that are good, you can see the difference in and how they approach their clients. You know, a lot of people think, as we were talking, you know, off air, a lot of people think that therapy is like Dr. Phil. And
Yes.
that's like the most frustrating thing in the entire world, because you want to just scream from the roof and say, it's not like that. Please don't believe it's like that.
Right. But at the same time, what I've found, and I'd be interested to hear what you think about this, because I have found it really dissonant in my own, like, I don't know how to really say it, but like of also empathizing with why people think that, because it's really the only type of representation that's been out there in the mainstream for therapy.
Right.
Like I got asked a question on Discord recently of what do you think is an accurate piece of representation, or like how do you think therapy has been accurately portrayed in the media? And I had a hell of a time trying to come up with something.
What did you come up with?
I think I said that I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Hope Springs, but it's got like Steve Carell plays a therapist for Meryl Streep and Tommy Lee Jones, and like that was decent because I think it showed to some extent some of the outside boringness of therapy. Like it's boring to an observer, but not to who's in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like that was one example. And then also the therapist that's in Big Little Lies isn't too bad. Like there were a couple instances that I thought were okay, but like I couldn't really think beyond that because even in like Good Will Hunting, Robin Williams does some stuff that like wouldn't fly. And so
terrible.
It's like, it's really hard. So I don't know if you have any ideas of like what you've seen that would be an accurate representation of therapy. Cause I think I know my community would love to know it.
Oh, no, I have not one. So I don't think that I can contribute anything to that.
See, and that makes me so like profoundly sad because I feel like as therapists, like you're up against that to some extent because people think I'm going to sit there and yell at them for an hour and then be like, how's that working for you over and over again? And therapy is not generally a confrontational endeavor. At least it isn't in my practice. I don't know.
I think, with some people you can really push them. And I think in prisons, maybe it was a little more confrontational at times. Sure. I did some verbal de-escalation stuff, but I did see we got a question. Eke was looking, and I'd be interested in your answer as well. Eke was asking, talk a little bit about window shopping for the right therapist. And I think that's kind of an interesting question. Like if someone were looking for the right therapist, what would you say, like as somebody who practices, what are the things that you think they should be looking for?
For me, it's honestly up front. I say this a lot. It's all about vibe. Like I think when you're on like Psychology Today or you're making a call, like if you feel icky in your first phone call, don't go. Like if you feel at odds with yourself, or if you're in a first session, right? Like if you do a consultation, first of all, I think all therapists should offer free 15, 30-minute consultations. I do that. I wish more did. Of like,
that's amazing.
That is amazing. Because you got to see if it's a good fit. Like I want a person to know that when they come to see me, they're like, hey, no, I vibe with this guy. This is cool. Because a first session for me, like, I mean, I'm very honest about how much I charge. Like a first session for me is $210. And so like either if your insurance is taking that or if you're paying that out of pocket, that's a lot of money to pay to know if we're going to be a good fit or not. And so right. But I really think it's about vibe up front. You have to feel like you connect on some way. And not like you have to force it with the person. I also think if a therapist is overly trying to sell you on themselves, like get out. like I'm not there to sell myself. I'm there to like be there and be whatever you need. A therapist who says they're open to feedback, I think is really important. A therapist who asks what would be meaningful for you and what do you consider to be success. And I also think a therapist who's willing to be direct and open about, hey, I'm probably not going to do a ton up front because I really want to do a proper assessment. I want to have a good feel for what's going on before I step in. Like, I think that's important too. So what about you? Like, what do you think? I'd love to know what you think too.
Well, I think that, I agree with you 100% that, I didn't know that there were therapists out there that actually offer like a 15-minute free consult, because I think that would be incredible. That's something that I don't see, honestly, because I even tell people to go and do an exploratory phone call, like ask them if they have 10 minutes to talk about their approach or, how they address certain things or, get a feel for them. But I didn't know that there people actually offered like a free 15-minute, like, hey, come and talk for 15 minutes. Like, that's amazing. But I would say too, like people who are definitely goal oriented, like when you contribute, I guess that, people should say, hey, what do you want to accomplish in therapy? I think that's so important because sometimes, goals are going to be at odds. You don't want your therapist setting your goals. You want to actually have goals of symptom reduction, but have a therapist that has a plan. Like I tell people, when you have a diagnosis, sometimes people feel hesitant to even ask like what that is or have their therapist share that with them. And like you, I think assessment, it drives everything. If you don't have the correct diagnosis or you don't have the correct assessment, therapy is going to be a mess because you're not going to address the right thing. So I think those are so important. And, my thing for people is that you have to get along. You have to agree with their approach. Some therapists are going to be more assertive than others. Some people aren't going to like that. Some people are going to be more laid back than others. So like making sure that you do, I think vibe is a great word, but also that like this is somebody who has a plan, that has a style that kind of meshes with your style.
Yep.
And for me, I think you should have like definite goals. I would tell people when I was meeting with them, if you don't see any shifts in like 3 months, we need to reassess and we have to look at what we're doing here. So I think that
Absolutely.
like you should be able to notice some changes, obviously not immediately, but and feel free to talk to them about that. Like you shouldn't feel like you can't trust them or reticent or that they're
Right.
going to attack you. Like this is stuff people feel. So I mean, yeah, I think it's really important. And also, a big warning sign for me is when people say they can treat everyone.
Yes.
Like I
Yes.
treat kids, I treat, seniors, I treat couples, I treat like you can't be an expert at everything. So, looking at who do they treat, what are their areas of expertise, and trying to find somebody that's going to match, kind of what you feel your primary issues are. You may not know exactly what your diagnosis is, like you may not know if you're depressed, is that part of a bipolar disorder or just major depression or
Hmm.
a million other things. But if you know that like depression is an issue for you and you're probably insightful enough to know that, look for somebody who addresses those issues and
Sure.
not just somebody who treats everything.
Right. I'm 100% on board with that. Absolutely. And you should never feel at odds with your therapist. Like I just
Yeah.
like really like if you ever feel like you're at odds with your therapist, it's time for a conversation. And if your therapist can't handle, I say this to everybody who's watching right now, if you have a therapist and your therapist cannot handle you bringing that conversation up and talking about goodness of fit and talking about your experience of therapy, like that is not a good sign. Your therapist should be 100% open to that. And I will say that
Agreed.
until the day I die. Um, so I saw a really cool question I want to ask you. If you could sit down and chat with one famous psychologist, dead or alive, who would it be and why? I love that
Oh,
question.
it has to be a psychologist because I have
Yeah.
so many other people out there. Probably, was it? Let me think. That is a really great
I
question.
know, I know.
Um,
I'm putting it on you because I'm thinking while you
Okay,
answer.
well, what about Viktor Frankl? Man's search for meaning. The person who he endured a concentration camp. Psychiatrist. A psychiatrist hopefully qualifies.
Yes,
Um,
yeah, I would say it does.
but yeah, I mean, that book was just fantastic. He writes his experience of like resilience and survival and how he internalized his experience and really interested in talking with him. I would also be really interested, if we're going to say a psychologist, in Maslow. And the reason why is because Maslow has such an
Huh.
interesting history personally of there's a great kind of sad story. His mother used to berate him, used to put like a lock on the refrigerator, apparently, was really not nice to him and told him how ugly he was all the time. And when he was walking to school one day, there's this story that he came across a bunch of kittens, and he really loved these kittens, and he would sneak them food and all this stuff. And his mother discovered he was keeping these kittens, and and ended their life in front of him. And he didn't talk with her since, but he developed this incredible system of how we actualize ourselves and how we come into our own and what makes for higher level experience. And I wonder how much that, like how he came to that from the place he was at. And so I'd be interested in that as well. But I think Viktor Frankl would probably be number one.
That
How
would
about you?
that would definitely be a fascinating one. You know what? So I kept like shuffling through the archives of my head trying to think, and the same name kind of kept popping up within it. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but Steve DeShazer is one of the developers of solution focused therapy who's like kind of
Mm-hmm.
credited with that. And Steve was he's no longer alive, but Steve was like a really like eccentric, kind of odd guy. There are some like theories or some people that say they think that he might have been autistic.
Interesting.
But that's never been confirmed, at least as far as I know. But he had just like these really amazing ideas about how therapy doesn't have to be about problems, that like you just keep focusing on problems and all that does is just keep the problem saturated narrative alive, and that people really are capable of change, and that it's embedded in language, and it's embedded in this idea that like if you just focus on what else you could be doing and can really figure out a way to actualize that and not be constrained by these thoughts of the problem constantly, that you are capable of moving forward. And I love people who are eccentric and a little bit odd, and he is definitely odd to watch. If you ever see him do therapy, it's quite fascinating. but I would
No,
love
I
to
love
have a
that.
conversation with him about his ideas and how he came to some of the perspectives he came to, because him and his wife were, I think Insoo Kim Berg is still alive, but Steve was he was kind of an odd duck, but he really poked at the field in a way that I don't think anybody else had prior to him. So that would be my answer.
That's really interesting. What do you think personally about how therapy in general, a lot of therapy, not I operate, just for full disclosure, from like a cognitive behavioral perspective, and I always have, but and cognitive behavioral really does start kind of now and looks forward for the most part. I mean, it references the past in as much as it contributes to current problems, but really isn't past focused, whereas there is a lot of therapy that's very past focused. I mean, how do you feel that balance should be, and do you feel like that's useful?
So, I was trained from the very first day I arrived in grad school. I was trained integratively. And so with integrative systemic therapy it used to be integrative problem-centered meta frameworks. That's too much of a mouthful, so they changed it to integrative systemic therapy. But so I have maybe a little bit of an odd answer to this, which is that I think it really depends on the problem at hand. I tended to not spend too much time in the past, because the way that I'll put it to clients sometimes is I'll say, okay, look, so we have our goal, right? So here we have two options, okay? So let's say your goal is to communicate more effectively with your partner or partners, and we've thought about how to operationalize that through clear language, soft startups, yada yada, right? So all of that is generally behavioral and somewhat meaning based, although there's emotion there, but it's behavioral change. And so I'll be like, okay, so here's our option. We can talk about all the things in your life that led up to the reasons why you act the way you do now. And we can go in there, we'll dig into your family of origin, we'll look at your internal family experience, we'll look at object relate, we'll do all of this stuff. And then what is that gonna do? And they'll usually say, well, then I'll be able to communicate more effectively. And it'll look like this. And I'll say, okay, and so what if we just did that? What if we that's our other option. If you're saying to me, I want to use soft startups with my partner, and I want to engage in empathic listening, and I want to be able to repeat back what I heard, that's all behavioral. I could just coach you to do that. So do you really want to go down the gauntlet of your family of origin experience to understand why you do what you're going to change, or do you just want to try changing it first? And I tend to try to go down the path of least resistance and the least intrusive path, which is often behavioral. And so that's kind of the path that I'll take. But sometimes clients really get a lot out of, as I'm sure you know, right? Clients sometimes really get a lot out of being able to go deep and understand why things are the way they are. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
I think it also, though, can be, in that I think people want to go there and it puts them in a bad headspace. I mean, I think that they may deeply want to explore their history in a lot of detail. And I think they may want to kind of rehash things and tell someone about them. And I think to some extent that can be useful. But I also think that, that headspace is sometimes what really brings up a lot of symptomology that doesn't need to happen. So it's fascinating to me, because I know that with trauma work, obviously there's a lot of reprocessing that happens and a lot of different methods that you can use. And it's very important to have those things there. But I noticed that there was always a push for me to let's go back in, let's do more past, let's kind of tell those stories again. And oftentimes it would put them in a mindset of helplessness and frameworks which they can't change. And that would end up, putting them in a weaker position and certainly influencing work negatively, which is kind of odd to say, but because I think people expect that therapy should be so past focused. But like you, I try to start, where are you right now? Who are you right now? And let's move ahead.
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in the present and stuff, and especially emotional experiencing in the present. Huge fan of that, because I think we use the past to escape our present emotional experience a lot. Not that that's always a bad thing, but past and future thinking gets people right out of the present. And I think because the present has some intensity to it that I think a lot of people aren't really taught how to handle very well. If you feel really agitated or anxious in the moment, oftentimes people try to escape it. And what we know about working with anxiety is avoidance just makes it worse. but I think sometimes the past and the future can be used as avoidance. So, yeah, that's the beautiful art of therapy, right? And of psychology. Right. It's not always exact. So I have a question about your esports consulting. Somebody said, what's the best way to get into esports as a psychologist? Like, what are some things I could be doing right now to get into the esports psychologist or into mental performance? I'm guessing they're kind of at the early stages of development of becoming a psychologist.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's interesting is that, esports is really wide open and certainly in its infancy in and of itself. Even though it makes millions of dollars, obviously, it's highly watched. It still isn't as mainstream as it can be. Mm-hmm. And so we're seeing all these, ESPN is going to be is developing, a channel that should be coming out, I think, in the fall. But as a psychologist, this is a good question. So, for me, my path was really interesting. I connected up with people on Twitter. I have done performance work. I mean, a lot of the work I do with executives and with other people are around enhancing performance and using psychology to do that. And when you mix that with a background in kind of mental health and dealing with things like anxiety and stress, I mean, all of those things are so important. And when you're looking at esports, you're looking at someone who has to make very fast decisions on a large stage with a lot of people watching, and you have to be able to do that and implement good decisions. So you start to look at sports performance in general, and looking more toward those lines of study. So if you're early in your development, I would take advantage of looking at sports psychology and sports psychology programs, and maybe not starting from a clinical base, but something where you're looking at athletics, and that would be a much easier transition, I think. And then start volunteering or interning at, esports organizations within your college or university, and plenty of universities have them now. So working with those coaches, I work in collaboration with the coaches of our team. I work with Justice Esports. Justice is amazing. I'm going to give them a little plug because they are really pro mental health and pro players. So like, if you have autism, but you're really awesome at a game, we want you. We are no toxicity, zero tolerance for toxicity. We have we have some players that will struggle with certain kind of issues. We don't care, we support them. It's a place where really everybody can play. You're good at your game. We support you as a person. We want to support your talent and support your development. So I think that for me, aligning with that particular organization is kind of a no-brainer. But and they were looking for someone who shares a similar mission. So they loved the fact that I was doing stuff on Twitch and other things. But if you're just getting into it, yeah, I would just use the system that's in place, study sports psychology, intern with your esports team at your university. And if your university doesn't have one, go out and intern or volunteer with esports organizations at other universities. Start doing stuff on Twitch, get involved. Approach organizations yourself as you gain more skills, and start really kind of putting yourself out there to get noticed. Right now, very few of them. If there are others, I'm not as aware of how many are out there, but I'm not aware of how many are getting paid and who are out there and doing that work. But it's going to be massive. I mean, we see it. The wave is coming, and it's not going to get any easier for people to deal with high stress and high stakes and the challenges they have to overcome to play their best in a tournament or competition. So it's wide open, and I encourage anybody to get involved. It's really cool.
Yeah, that is the next step on my trajectory. Hopefully, is that's a area I'm trying to get my foot in the door with also, because I had a couple little things pop up over the last year or so that I haven't been able to pursue as much as I wanted to, but that's definitely an arena I'm trying to get into as well. So I love hearing your thoughts about that, and it also feels very validating to know that like that wave, like I've had a sense of that too, and I've been wanting to get on board, and hearing you say that to some extent kind of lights a fire under my ass. So I appreciate that.
Good. You should be. You're perfect for it. I mean, that's a kind, and getting aligned with an organization that like shares your goals and shares like your mission. Because esports can be kind of, if we're being honest, they can be kind of toxic, and people can be bullies and be nasty to each other. So be a part of an organization that really kind of values what you bring to the table, but also is treating people well. And I think that's really important as you as you move forward. But I know you wouldn't choose an organization that was anything less.
No, certainly not. But and I may pick your brain at some point about how to determine that.
Cool.
Just so. Let's see. I wanted to see. There was a good. If a how would you suggest a person this is a bit of a gear shift here, but I really like the question. How would you suggest a person handle their mental health diagnosis in the workplace, at school, or in social circles? Do you feel it's better to keep private or to be open about it?
Oh, this is a great question, right? I mean, I think that it's not about, first of all, I want to be really clear, it's not about hiding anything, but no one ever leads with their primary problems, right? I mean, I don't introduce myself. Like when you and I met, Dr. Mick, I didn't say, hi, I'm Julie, I have asthma. You know, like I do have asthma, but you know, like I didn't lead with that.
Hi, I'm Ryan, I have chronic motor tic syndrome. Yeah, right.
Right.
It's so true. It's so true.
So I don't feel like I wasn't hiding that I have asthma. I'm not embarrassed that I have asthma. But you know, like in general social circles or when I go to work, I mean, I just think of it like any other medical issue. You know, like you are usually pretty private about that. You don't lead with it. But if someone gets to know you really well, they're probably going to pick up, you know, maybe 6 months down the road, maybe a year. If there's something that you struggle with, or you know, you're probably going to talk about it at some point, just like you talk about anything else.
Sure.
Like I may, for example, like because I have asthma, it's triggered by certain kind of dusts. Like if I were out with a friend and they want to go to this place and it's just been renovated and it smells really terribly like paint and all that fumes,
Oh, yeah.
I'd be like, oh man, I can't go in there because, you know, I have asthma. It would probably come up.
Sure.
But, you know, in my everyday life, it really doesn't come up all that much. And I think that really contributes to us seeing people as people. Like we don't want to see people as illnesses, and you don't want to see yourself that way or present that way either. And again, it's not about hiding it or being embarrassed. It's just about the fact that this is one small thing about you, or one thing about you. It may not be small, but let someone get to know you. Don't lead with it. And I think that's true in work, in dating, in
Sure.
life, right?
Sure.
So I mean that's kind of I don't want that to be a silly answer, but like that's certainly how I feel about it. If someone has diabetes, anything, if I were dating someone, you know, if they led with that, I would just think no matter what it was, that's really strange and you probably wouldn't hear from me again. So
Sure.
you know, that's kind of how I feel about it. Do you have any other thoughts?
No, I really appreciate your answer on that, because it's a question that I've contemplated a lot too, because I think we're in an interesting space right now where like mental health is being talked about more, but because it's still in its infant stages of being talked about, it's not particularly refined. And so people are like, okay, cool. Like, yeah, you've got generalized anxiety disorder, and like, I know that I need to be cool about that. But do I ask about it or do I let it exist? And do I be open about it? Like, it's just like everybody's kind of trying to tiptoe around. I don't quite know how to talk about this because this isn't something that's always been out there, but it seems to be more okay. And so I found myself agreeing with just about everything you just said. So I don't know that I have much to add beyond that.
Yeah, and you know, the people who get to know you and like you, you know, when things come up, like maybe you do struggle with certain things, that's when really people are empathetic because they know you for you. Like they recognize, and it also helps, I think, when we look at mental illness in general, it helps to really humanize it because people recognize that, hey, you know, it's like anything else, like diabetes or asthma, like people have to learn to manage these things, and we are ultimately responsible for managing whatever our struggles are. But
Right.
you know, in that case, you know, it's just a matter of getting to know somebody, and it's just becomes a part of them, and you know, you're already kind of hooked. You know, like we know them, we like them, and it's just one other thing about them that we have to learn and be, you know, patient and supportive with.
Agreed. All right, this is it's kind of like a simplistic question, maybe one of those cliche questions, but I actually genuinely would love to hear your answer on it. What if you had number one secret to maintaining happy and healthy relationships? What would you say? As a psychologist, as somebody with the breadth of experience that you have, what do you think?
Oh goodness. Well, you're the marriage and family therapist, right? I mean, this is your area of expertise. So this isn't even my area. And
Here,
I
actually,
really
can I flip it for you? How about here? I'll do it this way, because number one secret to maintaining a happy and healthy relationship with yourself and your own mental health.
Man, I think having a good sense of humor is really important. And I don't mean that in a, like, not mean humor, but like, you have to be lighthearted about, like, you can go through terrible struggles and have terrible things happen. But if at the end of the day, like, you can't, and I know that sounds, and having a little self-empathy, I think that's like part of it, is being able to be like, be gentle on yourself and be okay with the fact that, like, yeah, you make mistakes. And that's why I think humor comes to mind, because like, if I trip on a sidewalk crack and I feel really stupid in front of a group of people, like, I can be really hard on myself and embarrassed, or I can just kind of laugh about it and be like, hey, where'd that sidewalk come from? You know, like, there's a million ways in which we go about our world that we're not really kind to ourselves. But I think that being happy takes more than just being kind. I think that it takes, you know, having a bit of, that's why I say, like, a bit of humor with yourself, with the world, not being too, like, crappy things happen. You know, like, if you get too, like, if you're on Twitter at all, like, it can be a nasty, horrible place to
Yeah.
be. And it's like all politics and hate all the time. And like, if you can't see that and just say, oh my God, what kind of lives do these people have that they like are like this all the time? Like, it must be really intense in that world. And I can't be there. And like, even when I did work like at the prison, I had to find a way to kind of unwind. You know, like, I would talk to people about really terrible things that they had done. You know, the prison I worked at was a supermax facility.
Oh,
There are
wow.
people serving 20 years to life. Some of them, you know, you do evaluations, they've done, you know, really awful things. And you can't just say, well, I just heard about, like, you know, a serial rapist and this, and now I'm going to go home and eat some Cheetos. Like, you have to have a way to like decompress.
Right.
So, you know, you have to have a good way of coping and dealing, and, you know, bad conversations can't be the only conversations you have. So to me, it means, you know, keeping your mindset you have to be able to stay in a place of positivity and have a bit of humor. And it sounds like a stupid answer, but for me, I think resiliency comes from being able to put things in perspective, and humor does that well. So if I had to choose one thing, and I don't think, you know, humor solves everything,
Right.
and it can be, in no way, but if I had to choose one thing that I think can keep people in a decent place about where they're at in life and what's happening, it's being able to look at those things and even your problems, and being able to say, okay, like, I'll take these on, and, you know, things could be worse, and give it a smile. And they say sometimes resiliency is looking at problems and giving it a wink. And I think sometimes that's a good way to go.
Well, those two badass quotes in like one sentence about resiliency. I love that.
Mm.
That actually makes me think back to one of the first questions that we were talking about, like what to look for in a therapist. And I actually think a therapist who can use humor, I think, could be really awesome too, that like will take you seriously, but also can engage you in a level of humor about what's going on, or can like laugh with you. Like, if you can engage in some humor around what's going on for you, if your therapist isn't so uptight that they can't laugh along with you if you say something like, whether it's like self-deprecating or just like, you know, joking about something for yourself or whatever. Like, I think sometimes there's this like worry that therapists are going to be all uptight and stuff. And I like therapists who can loosen up a bit too.
Oh,
So
I,
it
I
just made me think
completely
of
agree. I completely agree. I had one, like, way back in the day, like, periodically I would have clients who were really free to be themselves. And sometimes it was really funny, ridiculous things. You know, people would say, oh, you know, I had this one night stand and I'm embarrassed to say, but it was amazing. Like, I mean,
that.
if I
Yeah.
have a client who's able to do those things, I feel like, you know, we're at a good place, because they
Yeah.
realize they can be honest. We can kind of joke with each other, but we can still get to a point where we're like, okay, so, you know, and I'm just making up that example, but like,
Sure.
you know, we can get to a place where we can examine things that are, you know, maybe serious issues or pattern repetitions, but able to say, okay, you know, this is something that felt really good to me. This is something that I know I probably shouldn't like, but I do, and have a real discussion around that that's raw and honest.
The question in chat: how do you deal with someone in a prison setting when you know they're completely irredeemable? I'm not sure what's meant by completely irredeemable, but at what point would you walk away from that client in a prison setting? And do you even
Okay,
have the
so
option to walk away from a client in a prison setting?
No, I have two. There's two reasons why someone will see a therapist in a prison setting, because there's so much need. Like, for example, there were two therapists and a psychiatrist and about 3,000 inmates, right? And I worked on something called the MHU, which is the mental health unit. So the way in which people come to you, one of two things. One is that they have amazing behavior, like they are, beyond reproach at behavior, but they really want to talk to a therapist. So someone's like, okay, we'll throw you a bone, right? It's the same
Okay.
reason why they'll let them participate in programs for like classes and stuff. Like those are the best inmates. But the primary inmates we see are the ones who are truly struggling. And, I guess I would say like they're struggling to the point where they're like floridly psychotic, smearing feces on the wall, like very,
Yeah.
very struggling in a deep way. And so when I see people, like sometimes we'd see people who, were assigned because of other reasons, but primarily it's either behavior problems or like true deep sickness. So I didn't see people who, when we talk about someone being irredeemable, these are people who are just truly ill, and not someone I would say is it's somebody who's like the typical, like we'd see in a movie, who's like psychopathic, or some of those things. And sometimes you get referred people who do have psychopathy, but
Hmm.
it's really for behavioral adjustments, and there's nothing like closer intimate about it. It's just about like, hey, you keep on like beating up your cellmates, and it's only because you want to switch cells, and there are better ways to do that where you don't get thrown in the hole. So like those are just like behavioral adjustments, not really like deep therapy, but therapists are often the people who do that work. So when I'm meeting with people, they're assigned to you, but it's because they're really truly ill and causing some disruption within the system. So that's kind of how you work. And you meet my clients, I met in both wrist and ankle chains. So they were shackled, and they were led into a room that was also guarded by by a guard. And sometimes we met, and there were always glass spaces so people
Mm.
could see what was happening if there was any problems. And I never had any problem with anyone. They were actually, they felt like if they weren't absolutely ill, they really felt it was a privilege to meet with a therapist, and treated it that way, because that privilege can be taken from you very quickly.
That's really cool. I'm curious. This is a self-indulgent question. Listening to you talk about this, because I've never worked in the prison system,
Yeah.
or even really come close. But I'm imagining myself as like a therapist being in that context, and like with somebody who's say chained up by their wrists and by their ankles, and like,
Yeah.
and then you're obviously sitting there and you are not shackled,
Right.
and you are like, you can go home at the end of the night and stuff like that. And I'm wondering like what that was, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but like what it was like for you in that space to be like with a person who's basically had all their freedom pulled, and then you have the ability to like go home at night, and like sitting with that just dissonant experience in the room at the same time.
Yeah, I think that, it's very humbling, and it makes you feel very fortunate. A lot of times I'd speak with people, and, you really, I mean, this sounds odd to say for some people, but like I really like them as people. Like
Mm-hmm.
I may not have liked, and one of the insightful comments that someone had said to me, and is something he said, I made a bad decision for 10 minutes. I did something awful for 10 minutes, and the rest of my life
Yeah.
is gone. 10 minutes. And you think about that, and you think, all of us, if you think deep down, do all of us have the potential to make a bad decision for 10 minutes, to be impulsive, to do something that's a loss of control? Maybe some of us don't, maybe some of us do, but it put me really close to that. And to think, you know, if somebody can spend 10 minutes and make a horrible decision that, does something really bad, does that make them an inherently bad or irredeemable, to use that language? And,
Mm-hmm.
I walked away with some of these folks thinking, it's startling in some sense, because, these are people that if you met them, they don't look like people that you want to say have done terrible things. They look like your neighbor or somebody that you met on, walking down the street.
Sure.
And I think that was always very jarring. Like, you always think you can tell who's going to do the bad thing, but you can't. They don't look different. Nobody is, because we're all people. And I would walk into the prison, it was dark. I'd leave, it's dark. They don't really have a lot of windows where I was. And so, yeah, I definitely had certainly some empathy for for the fact of their condition and how they're treated. The prison I worked in was actually, did primarily the consulting with, was actually fairly nice for prison standards. It was a fairly new build. And so it was more like sliding doors than it was iron bars. But yeah, people are treated a lot like, you know, not like people. And I think that it's because there's been, you know, people get shanked and stabbed, and professionals do as well. So, you know, there's an abundance of caution, and I don't blame people for that.
Sure.
But at the same time, there's no way to distinguish between who is the person who will commit that action and who won't. So, you know, it is as it is, and helping people adjust to that environment is a big part of what you do with some folks who are, you know, on suicide watch.
Sure, sure. So I get this question a lot, and Tally just asked it in chat, and so I'm gonna reframe Tally's question just a little bit. But by the way, how are you doing on time? Are you okay?
I'm doing good on time. I know that we started late, so I'm fine ending a bit later as well.
Okay, cool. So I get asked a lot about, like, how do you manage the heaviness of, you know, if you're sitting with people who are in various degrees of having some kind of psychopathy or psychological experience, or like that can be heavy, and how do you manage that in your everyday life? How do you, the question is generally, how do you not let it affect you? Which obviously it affects us. But it's kind of like, how do you manage that, like in your everyday life, if you're working with something that's really heavy? And I know all therapists have different answers to this question, so I would be curious to hear yours.
And I'd be curious to hear yours as well. For me, I think that it's really important that heavy conversations aren't the only conversations you have, right? Like, you don't want to have you don't want to wake up in the morning, go to work, sit in an office and hear about, like, you know, hour one, you hear about someone's sexual abuse. Hour two, you hear about a divorce. Hour three, you hear about, like, I mean, but it's literally like that some days. And then, you know, hop in your car, go home, have dinner, and go to bed. Like, that is a horrific day to me if that was your life. So you want to be able, like, for me, it's really important to, like, I am really into fitness. So that's something that's like a personal interest, but it's also a stress reliever. I'm really into journaling and kind of writing out my thoughts sometimes, just personally, and kind of processing things. So, you know, for me, I love to, you know, I would go out, I'd exercise in the morning, go lift some weights, then meet with people, have a break where I, you know, stepped outside or something. I have a dog that, you know, I had a dog at the time. She's since passed, but I have another dog. I had a dog that I loved. And, you know, you spend some time with your dogs, and dogs and cats are goofy and ridiculous, and, you know, pets are wonderful. And you have a spouse that you love, that you can have fun with and laugh with and watch some, you know, silly stand-up comedy on Netflix with.
Sure.
And, like, that makes it kind of part of an entire experience of your world, and not that it's the only thing that you're hearing day in and day out. Because to me, that would be that would just create a really difficult life to have to trudge through, and I think would make you as a therapist less effective too. I think that the healthier your therapist is, the better work they can do. And if they have
100%.
effective coping styles, and, you know, they can manage this stuff, I mean, it's a model too for the clients that you see. You know, I get up, I'm well rested, I exercise, and I hope that my clients, you know, get to a point where they can sleep well, that they don't have anything on their mind when they go to bed. And I see my therapy room, or the work that I do, like a bubble. And I know this sounds really silly, but I always saw it like a lung, and maybe it's that I had asthma, but, like, lungs seal themselves off. So, you know, when I would leave that office, it's almost like the lung resealed itself. Like, whatever's in that office, it stayed there. And I didn't bring that stuff home at all. I don't think about it at home, but rarely, unless I couldn't solve a problem. But I don't think about it, and it's not that I don't care about it, but, like, it stays there. As soon as I walk in that door, I am reviewing stuff, I'm on my game. But, like, when I leave, it stays, and I'm not bringing it with me.
So yeah, I know, I love it. And I mean, I see it as maybe embedded kind of in what you're saying. It's like a form of passive modeling to some extent, of, like, you know, because I always think, like, we encompass 1 hour of our client's week. They have to go live the rest of their week. And so, like, it's kind of the same way for us to some extent, of, like, you know, I can't, I'm not going to expect my clients to carry me with them for the rest of the week, and I certainly don't think they expect me to carry them with them the rest of the week. And so I think it's a level of compartmentalization while also, yeah, like engaging in self-care and knowing what you need to do to take care of yourself and acknowledging that you're affected when you're affected. I think when I'm supervising students, the thing that drives me crazy is when students try to convince themselves that they're unaffected by their clients or that they shouldn't be affected by their clients. And it's like, no. Like you totally are affected. It makes sense. You're sitting with some really heavy shit and it's a lot, and you can't possibly expect yourself to just be immune to it, because part of why you even got into this is because you have a human connection with people. So if you're going to empathize, you're vicariously living it a bit. So you're going to be affected. It's just, how can you acknowledge that and then choose to do something to take care of yourself when affected? And I learned how to do that working on a suicide hotline for 3 years, doing overnight shifts, and then having to go to class the next day, of like learning I couldn't carry it with me, or else it was going to destroy my ability to A, engage in school, and then B, be present the next time I did my overnight shift.
And did they address that? Like the suicide hotline, did they talk about that? Because that would seem to be, that's really heavy. I mean, it's not just you have some variation in your day. I mean, every person who's calling is at a point where they want to end their, I mean, that's no small stuff, you know?
It was, we had to go through a pretty significant training, and that was a big part of it, was making sure you take care of yourself. They were very cognizant of, if you get burnt out, here are the signs that you're getting burnt out. And if you notice these signs, you need to come talk to us. So like signs of burnout are like apathy, the phone rings, you don't want to answer it, you feel anxious to come to your volunteer shift, you find yourself really wanting to get out, you think about canceling, like that kind of thing. They're like, if you start to notice those things, one, it's okay. We need you to acknowledge it, because that could lead to something big, and we need you to be able to answer every call that comes in. And so talk to like the volunteer coordinator and stuff. And I actually had one point where I had to take a 2-week break because I had a really, really rough night of just like a lot of intensity. And I was kind of like, hey, I got to take a step back for a second. And I think as a therapist too, like we take vacations, and I think sometimes therapists feel like they can't take vacations because their clients need them. And I see that to some extent as being a control fallacy in relationship to clients, of like, your clients they might benefit a lot from you, but no client needs you. They were there before you, and they will be there after you. And so I think it's just kind of having some perspective that really goes a long way sometimes. So
I agree. A good therapist will take care of themselves, and they want you to take care of yourself as well. So I think that's a good way of looking at it.
Sure. So, all right. Can we do one more? Maybe one more, and then I'll let you go.
Let's do one more.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so it says, is there something that once accomplished, you would feel ready to hang up your psychology shoes and retire completely? Or do you envision yourself being involved in psychology in some way until death do you part?
I think, it's funny, and maybe this is bad. I can't imagine myself doing nothing, period. Like, I don't think that's in my blood. And I don't think that there is any one event. Like, I try to think about it in terms of finances, right? Like, what if tomorrow, and I think we do this periodically, like, and it makes no logical sense, but like, let's say the Powerball is $200 million, and, I buy a ticket because, that's the least logical time to buy one when your odds are the worst. But, of course, I'd buy a ticket and I hit, and I am the sole winner of this $200 million. There's no way at that point, certainly, I would hang up psychology, because what could I do with that money, right? I mean, right. So then it's just a whole other level of pursuit. So I don't think that there's any, I think that would probably be the pinnacle, though, of when somebody would just say, look, I'm done. But, I'm comfortable doing a lot of different things that I do now, and I haven't hung it up. And I think that your interests just shift and change with your ability to impact others. At least for me, it does. And that has been my trajectory, throughout. So I would expect that it's probably deeply in my blood, for better or worse, if you talk to people in my life. And I'm probably in it for the long run until I pass. So I don't know about you, but for me, I think that that's just That's gonna be how it is. It's sad, maybe, but I think that like it's something that's important to me, and it's something that I think is never finished.
You know, for whatever it's worth, I mean, I'm right with you, honestly. Like when you said the $200 million Powerball thing, like the first thing I thought was, well, I could I could lease a really awesome office. I could I could probably do mostly pro bono work.
Right.
I could reduce the cost to see me. I could reduce my caseload. It could be on my terms, and I could dump a shitload of money into the stream, and I'd still do everything. I just wouldn't have to worry about paying back my student loans, and I wouldn't have to worry about rent. I wouldn't have to, like, that kind of stuff. But like, I
Right.
don't think it would change anything about it, because like I love what I do, and I know so many therapists and psychologists, like, I mean, like you and like other people I've talked to, who would say the same thing, that like the majority of us get into this because we genuinely love what we're doing, and we genuinely love the puzzle, like putting together the puzzle, like the complexity of human relationships and like humanity and the brain and all this stuff. Like I would do this no matter what at this point. And so I feel the same way, that like I think I will have, I've told everybody on my stream, like I'll do this for as long as people will watch me. And so like I don't think it would change anything for me either. I'm sure it will be a lifelong thing. Now, granted, will we, travel more when we retire, and, might I move somewhere warmer? Sure. But like, I have a feeling I will probably see clients for the majority of my life until it feels like my mental capacity doesn't allow me to be sharp enough to do it anymore.
That's
So
wild. And do you gauge your client load? Like, is there a way in which you gauge that for yourself?
I gauge it by, well, it's a couple things. One, so currently I don't own my own practice. I contract my therapy work into another practice, and so
Okay.
there's there's a tiering system of what percentage of the revenue I collect based on how many clients I see. I mean, it's all very fair, but like if I see over 18 clients, it's the highest percentage. And for me, the sweet spot is actually between like 18 to 20. Like I feel really good at that amount. And so I don't really ever see myself going over like 21 clients a week, because then I feel like I'm stretched too thin. But for right
Yeah.
now, like I think the sweet spot is anywhere between 18 to 20 for me per week. And not just because of the financial incentive, but just because that feels like I'm engaged. It feels like I'm doing therapy as much as I want to be doing it. Although I will say maybe my absolute sweet spot would be probably like 15 a week, which for me is like perfection. But I'm cool with 18 right now, just because of the nature of wanting to make a living and wanting to really continue to build my practice and generate referrals and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, I mean, like it should be interesting as we see healthcare evolve, what kind of happens, and how American systems work. Because what I've noticed is that, when I was first going through grad school, people could really make a good living just doing private practice only, like
Mm-hmm.
nothing else. And
Mm-hmm.
now it seems like every therapist I know who's doing private practice is also doing some other things too. They're doing some teaching. And I don't know if it's just about variety or if it's about also like, supplementing, because you can only see so many patients and be good at what you do.
I agree. I know for me, I like the variety just inherently. Like I love teaching. I think teaching and supervising really keeps me on my toes, and keeps
Mhm.
me engaged in a different way. And my brain likes to attend to 5,000 things at once. And so it lets me engage in that to some extent.
Yeah,
But
no
I
kidding.
do,
You're playing a video game, interviewing
right,
someone,
exactly.
watching
Like
comments. Yeah.
my brain is like, this is like, for me, this is my sweet spot, because I feel like I'm fully immersed right now, and my brain's just clicking on all cylinders while we're doing this, and I like that a lot. And I just think that having the variety gives me something else to look. So like if I'm seeing clients and I know I get to teach, and then I'm not teaching, I'm like, oh cool, I have clients tonight. It's just a way to keep myself engaged. But I think, I mean, you could make a pretty decent living in private practice at this point. I mean, even in Chicago, although I will say if I had to lease my office space and pay rent at the same time, that would be tough. So that's why I contract. So I don't know. It's a weird
That's
space.
smart.
I think it's funny, because if you're in rural areas, then you have people who don't really have insurance that is going to reimburse very well. If you're in urban areas, people generally have insurance that reimburses better, but it's more expensive to have an office there. It's like a really weird balance for me in terms of like how to finagle that. But yeah, I will be interested to see what happens too. And I really hope that more people start having more access. Not because I want to make more money, but because I want to be able to help more people. So.
Right. I mean, like, and the thing is, just having care does not necessarily mean having access. And there's so many different things there. So yeah, I mean, like there are folks who probably watch your stream who don't have access to, you know, healthcare if they're in a country that maybe, you know, in maybe India or Pakistan or some of those other countries. So it's a wonderful thing that that we're able to chat here together. And thank you so much for having me on the stream. I saw someone mention, I think K-Girl said, be the Dr. Ruth of psychology, like a million years old. I'm down for that, although I won't be talking about sexual issues at like 90 years old, I think. I'm probably not going to go that direction. So anyway.
Hey, you know, hey, but you talking about psych, you'd be doing the psychology office hours on whatever platform it is at that point, whether it's Twitch or not.
At that point, I become like a weird fetish for people. I'm 90 years old talking about this stuff. I don't want to be that.
That's totally fair. Well, I seriously thank you so much for doing this. Like, I know you're a busy person, and for you to be willing to come and hang out with me and chat like this, like it was an honor for me. I love what you do. One more time, can we get a shout out for Dr. Gurner on the chat, please? Check her out Tuesdays and Thursdays. She does open psychology office hours. She answers questions. She's awesome. Follow her on Twitter. Do all that stuff. I loved this very much. I enjoyed talking with you on Tuesday. I enjoyed this. I'm hopeful we'll be able to do something like this again sometime in the future and reconnect again. And I may pick your brain behind the scenes about some of the esports stuff if you don't mind.
Sure. But, I mean, we can chat anytime. It was a pleasure meeting you. You are a great guy, and I hope that your followers know you're a great guy behind the scenes too. So thanks so much for reaching out. Great to speak with you, and I hope we can connect again.
Yes, absolutely. I'm all for it.